everybody. Welcome to Matt Connarton Unleashed. I'm your host, Matt Connarton, and I have a pounding headache. So if I seem a little off, not to make excuses, I'm just telling you right up front, I have a pounding headache. But I'm going to do the best I can. I took like 4 ibuprofen a little while ago, so I'm hoping they kick in soon. So welcome to the show. Some housekeeping things before we get into some issues this week. First of all, I have a brand new phone. There's a reason I'm telling you this. I went and got the Samsung, the Galaxy S5. It was actually with a particular deal that was being run over the holiday weekend. It was actually cheaper for me to go and get this phone than it was to continue under my old plan with my old carrier. I won't say where I went and got the phone because it's not like they're a sponsor giving me money to talk about them. But it was actually cheaper for me to get this fancy new phone, which I love. But it is a different carrier. After spending my entire adult life with the same cell phone carrier, I finally switched carriers. But in the process of switching carriers, we were not able to transfer my contacts over. So if you're someone who has my cell phone number, the number's the same, but chances are you're not in my new phone. So if you'd like to be in my new phone, please send me a text and I will add you to my new contacts. And even if you weren't in my contacts before, but would like to be now, this is an opportunity. I'm inviting you to send me a text and be in my contacts. And of course, my contact info, if you're watching us online, if you're streaming us on IPM Nation at ipmnation.com/MCUTV, you'll see my contact info there. Because if you're watching the show live, we do encourage interaction during the show, and I do accept text messages during the show, as well as Facebook postings, and you can get at me on Twitter at IPM Nation anytime, really. Etc., etc. But I know a lot of people stream the show live at ipmnation.com/MCUTV, where, of course, you can also, if you click the on-demand link, you can also watch archives of the show. If you're new to the program, we do get the shows up usually sometime between 10 and 11 p.m. the same day that the live show airs, because I know a lot of people can't see the show live because they're at work or at school or whatever it may be. Or it's just a beautiful day out, and the last thing you want to be doing is watching this show when it's a beautiful day out. It's a little hot and muggy, but I like it. I like it that way. So there you go. So I got my new phone, so that's exciting. Let's see. A little bit later today, too, if you are watching live on Wednesday, I'm going to be a guest on Norm and Friends. It sounds funny to say it after having been his co-host for 7 years, but he did invite me to be on it today as a guest. So I'll be sitting over there instead of sitting over here, so that'll be different. He invited me on to talk about depression, which has been a big subject in the wake of... it was a few weeks ago now, but the suicide of Robin Williams, and I had discussed depression on this show right after that happened with Dan Randlett, who called in that day, and we talked about some things, some of the stigma around it and so forth, and timely, actually, that I'll be going on Norm and Friends today to talk about it, because I go through this thing every year. When people talk about seasonal depression, they think of winter. A lot of people get the winter blues. I used to get it really bad. I've learned to manage it. It does affect my energy level in the winter. I definitely don't have as much energy. I'm someone who typically doesn't need a lot of sleep, but I do sleep more in the winter, closer to what a normal human gets as far as rest. But I go through this seasonal thing. Seems to happen every year at the end of August going into September, the end of summer, the kind of this change of seasons kind of thing. And I'll tell you what, it hit me hard this year. I'm feeling better today. Yesterday, I don't think I've felt that way in 10 years. I mean, I was in rough shape. I was really down. I get through it. The whole way that I got, and we'll talk about this in depth, I'm sure, later on Norm and Friends, but just quickly, the reason I originally got involved in hypnosis, because I'm a hypnotherapist, The way I originally got interested in it was learning how to hypnotize myself to deal with my depression. Because I used to, I had I was never diagnosed, but I think I was manic depressive. And I learned how to use hypnosis / meditation along with exercise to deal with it and manage it and overcome it. I've never been on any kind of medication or anything for it. Not that I'm in any way suggesting that people shouldn't take medication for depression. Lots of people do, and lots of people need it. I just I've been able to avoid that and manage it through other means. But because I was able to work my way through what I used to go through, it doesn't mean that now every day is rainbows and unicorns. And I do go through this thing every year, end of August into early September and I know we still have some summer left, a couple more, at least 2.5 more weeks of summer. But of course, you notice the change of seasons pretty much. By the time you get late August, you start to notice it's getting darker earlier, which I think is what triggers it with me, the shorter daylight. Because summer's my favorite time of year. I like the long days, and I actually I'm strange, not only do I not mind the heat, I actually enjoy it. When it's 90 degrees out, I'm in heaven. I actually love hot weather. So I don't even mind humidity. I mean, a dry heat's always better, but even when it's humid and muggy, it doesn't really bother me. But this year, that little seasonal change, wow, it hit me hard. And I realize now, too, that I started to feel it. It started to creep in a couple weeks ago, and it just got really bad, and it kind of came to a head yesterday. Obviously, today I feel much better. I woke up this morning, thank God, feeling more like my normal self. So I'm over the hump. I feel pretty okay today. So I think I'm past another year's summer to fall seasonal change. But this year, wow, like I said, it's been at least a decade since I felt that bad. I've never been truly suicidal. Even when I used to suffer with depression on a consistent basis years ago, I always had kind of a built-in, I thought of it as kind of a built-in safety valve. I'm just afraid of death. I'm afraid to die. I wouldn't make a very good terrorist for that reason. So FAA, take notice. If I happen to be on a no-fly list, you can take me off. It's okay. Nothing's going to happen with me getting on a plane, at least not that I would facilitate. No, I'm just always, I'm afraid of death, like a lot of people are. So even in my darkest moments, I would never seriously consider killing myself. But I can honestly say that yesterday, the way I felt most of the day yesterday, it's a good thing I'm afraid to die because I kind of wanted to. I was in rough shape. So thank God I woke up today noticing, okay, I think I'm feeling a lot better, and and seeing the sun shining definitely helped, and got off to a good start today, and looks like I got through. Like I said, that's the one, it hits me every single year. End of August, it's like, it just gets me. But I'm all right now. Everything's good. Part of why I wanted to tell you that, though, is because that's what we're going to be talking about this week on Norman Friends. Apparently, I'm sure we'll talk about some other stuff, too, when I go on as a guest. But the other thing is, too, I want to kind of apologize to anyone who listened to the Matt Connarton show last night. I also, of course, do a couple shows for DKRN.FM. By the way, for those wondering, it's still the Dr. Kevin Radio Network. We're just not really calling it that anymore. We're sort of just trying to rebrand it as DKRN.FM. And it's less to type in when you go to your browser to punch that in. But last night on the Matt Connarton show, because I was still very much in that mode of feeling like it's a good thing I'm afraid to die or I'd kill myself right now. And as a result, I opened the show explaining how I was feeling, and then I just played music for the rest of the show because I didn't even feel like talking. I was just trying to get through it. I could have arranged something earlier in the day to maybe run a repeat or something, but I was hoping that by the time I had to go on the air last night, I would be feeling better, and I wasn't. And to try to do something last minute is a very big hassle as far as trying to get a replay put into that slot. So I just went ahead and did the show, but I don't know if anyone even stayed and listened. I opened the show. I said, I feel terrible. I'm going to play some music. And that was the entire show. It's supposed to be a talk show, but so I apologize if you were listening to the Matt Connarton show last night, expecting my usual wit and wisdom, and instead getting a bunch of music. Although I think it was a good playlist. I played some good stuff. I've become obsessed with this band Haim. I didn't like their big single, Forever, but I saw them on SNL on a replay of SNL, a repeat, doing a couple other songs. And then I started to look up their stuff on YouTube, and they're like my new favorite band in terms of new bands, reasonably new bands. Kiss is still my all-time favorite, but as far as recent stuff, I think Haim is my new favorite band of the last few years. So I guess that'll do it for the housekeeping part. Let's get to some stuff. I have a bunch of small stuff today. I don't have one big thing where I say, okay, here's the main topic, and then we'll see what else we fit in, and then we don't end up fitting anything else in because I spend the entire show rambling about this one thing. This is just a bunch, kind of a grab bag of little stuff. So we might actually get through all of it. As always, whatever we don't get through, we'll get to tomorrow night on the radio edition of the show at dkrn.fm. Thursday nights at 9 p.m. Eastern. But let's see. So I saw this right before coming here today on HuffPost. Ed Mazza wrote this very short story. Supreme Court Justice Antonin Scalia, who's, of course, very conservative and a pro-death penalty guy, says here he once pushed death penalty for a now exonerated inmate named Henry Lee McCollum. You may have heard his name in the news. Maybe not. I know death penalty stuff, it gets mentioned in dribs and drabs, and there's not a lot of mainstream national coverage of the death penalty on any kind of consistent basis, but, except when there's a botched execution somewhere. And then it's a big deal for a couple days, and then everyone kind of forgets about it until something else comes up. But let me read this to you quickly because, as regular viewers of the show know, I loathe the death penalty and desperately want to see it gone. Says here, a North Carolina row inmate exonerated by DNA evidence on Tuesday was once held up by Supreme Court Justice Antonin Scalia as an example of someone who deserved to die. When the court declined to review an unrelated death row case out of Texas, of course, Texas, in 1994, Justice Harry A. Blackmun issued a dissenting opinion arguing that capital punishment is cruel and unusual and therefore unconstitutional. Which I would agree. Scalia answered back with an opinion of his own, quote, and this is, he wrote this in the case of Callins versus Collins, quote, for example, the case of an 11-year-old girl raped by 4 men and then killed by stuffing her panties down her throat. How enviable a quiet death by lethal injection compared with that, unquote. He was referring to Henry Lee McCollum, who at the time had already been on death row for 12 years. McCollum's conviction was overturned on Tuesday when DNA evidence implicated another man in the case. McCollum had been on death row for almost 30 years. 30 years. Superior Court Judge Douglas Sasser also overturned the conviction against McCollum's half-brother, Leon Brown, who has been serving a life sentence in connection with the case. Blackmun later responded to Scalia, writing of the flaws in the case as well as McCollum's mental capacity. He wrote, quote, that our system of capital punishment would single out Buddy McCollum to die for this brutal crime only confirms my conclusion that the death penalty experiment has failed. Our system of capital punishment simply does not accurately and consistently determine which defendants most deserve to die, unquote. Sorry, I know the air quotes is pretentious, but it's in the article. Scalia has been a frequent and vocal supporter of the death penalty and even once suggested that an innocent man had never been put to death, at least in recent years. Yeah, and some people, by the way, I think do legitimately and sincerely believe that and delude themselves with this idea that, well, it's such a rare thing. It's such a rare occurrence that an innocent person be convicted of murder. And I think I've shared with you plenty of evidence on this program that I've gotten from, I don't know why I was, again, remember, I have a pounding headache. That's why even a word like gotten is difficult to access. That I've gotten from various sources over the years that clearly indicates that it's not that rare and that sometimes innocent people are sentenced, are convicted of murder and sentenced to die. And my entire argument against the death penalty is predicated on that. I've always said, look, if it were a perfect system, I don't know that I would even be that opposed to the death penalty. I think the punishment should fit the crime. And if you're someone who is capable of going and committing a murder in cold blood, taking the life of an innocent human being, then maybe you should be put to death. Maybe you're one we don't need. Okay? If it were a perfect system, I think I might be okay with that. I understand the logic of it. I understand the gut level reaction people have when they hear of a heinous murder like the one described in this article. And of course, it's natural, it's human nature to think, well, that individual deserves to be killed. They should be deprived of his or her life. I understand all that. But the problem is very simple. It's not a perfect system. And because it's not a perfect system, and it never will be, as long as human beings are involved, it will always be fallible. There will always be mistakes made. And it's too much of a risk to take with human life to, if someone's locked up for 30 years like this guy was, you can never give him back the time that he lost, but at least you can let him out. But if you've already executed him, it's a little too late to say, oops, our bad. And this is why I think more and more conservatives now are coming over to the anti-death penalty side. Granted, the death penalty itself has never been a truly partisan issue. It tends to skew that, more liberal-minded Democrats oppose it and conservative Republicans are for it. But unlike a lot of somewhat partisan issues, there's always been a lot of crossover with the death penalty. There's always been some conservatives who oppose it because they don't trust, one of the central tenets of conservatism is a distrust of the government. Well, if you don't trust the government to get anything right, why would you trust them with something as solemn as deciding who lives and who dies? And there's always been Democrats who are pro-death penalty, including, by the way, our current president. Obama is a pro-death penalty guy. Bill Clinton was very pro-death penalty. He's since moderated his position, I guess. He tries not to answer that directly when he's asked about it now. Our last two Democratic presidents have been pro-death penalty. I don't know where Jimmy Carter falls on that. All right, there's a little bit more to this article. Scalia wrote in the 2006 Kansas versus Marsh case, quote, "It should be noted at the outset that the dissent does not discuss a single case, not one, in which it is clear that a person was executed for a crime he did not commit. If such an event had occurred in recent years, we would not have to hunt for it. The innocent's name would be shouted from the rooftops by the abolition lobby," unquote. In 2006, Scalia wrote that. Well, just because the dissenter didn't bother to mention a specific case doesn't mean there haven't been specific cases. There's been tons of specific cases where either we find out that someone was not really guilty and we had to let them out, or we find out tragically, even more tragically, after they've been executed, that either they were not guilty or they may not have been guilty, that there was something faulty in the way the case was tried, someone recanted testimony, some new evidence came to light. That's just naive and crazy to say. If such an event had occurred in recent years, we wouldn't have to hunt for it. There's plenty of cases. There's plenty of evidence to suggest that this is a horribly flawed system. And, no wonder where the last supposedly, what's the word I'm looking for? Civilized, industrialized nation to do this. All right, moving on. Like I said, we're going to go through these quick. You thought, because I know what longtime viewers thought, you thought, oh, Matt's opening with something related to the death penalty now. He's going to spend the entire hour on the death penalty. Nope. Fooled you. Sometimes I zig when you think I'm going to zag. God, my head hurts. For ibuprofen, you would think this headache would be gone by now. At least I'm not depressed anymore. This I certainly saw coming. The AP posted this last night. Dateline Milwaukee. Paul Ryan blames Obama in rise of the Islamic State. So we're done blaming Obama for Putin invading Ukraine. Now we're blaming him for the... sorry, I was distracted by my phone vibrating. I'm getting used to this new... Did I mention I got the Samsung Galaxy S5? It's very nice. If you'd seen my old phone, you'd understand why I'm so enthralled by my new toy. All right, let me read this to you quickly. So, U.S. Representative Paul Ryan blamed the Obama administration Tuesday for contributing to the circumstances that led to the swift ascent of the Islamic State, or the IS as the media is calling it, a militant group that purportedly beheaded a second American journalist in 2 weeks. Ryan had been taking questions from a panel of reporters during a Milwaukee luncheon when he was asked to respond to a news report that journalist Steven Sotloff had been beheaded. The congressman asked the several hundred people in the audience to observe a moment of silence and then suggested that the Islamic State's rise to power coincided with a series of Obama missteps. He said, quote, "I do think a good deal of the rise stems from bad decisions made by the administration in foreign policy with respect to Syria and Iraq. Those decisions created a vacuum, which is now being filled by ISIS," a reference to the Islamic State. Okay, before we go on, I blame Bush and Cheney for invading Iraq. Which completely destabilized everything. Here's where we really are with this, in my view. We, by the horrendous neoconservative foreign policy of the Bush and Cheney administration, we set ourselves up for... Here's the reality. It's generational war, a phrase that I've heard Ron Paul use, where we get into these situations where we're just going to be fighting forever. We're going to be fighting the same war forever. The smartest thing to do, and I understand why we didn't do it this way, but I believe the smartest thing to do post 9/11 would be to, I don't believe we ever should have invaded Iraq, considering trying to tie Saddam Hussein to 9/11 was pretty tenuous at best, but it was used as an excuse to go and to try to control that oil. That's the real reason, clearly. It was done for business reasons. War is business, not just because of the oil, but there are companies, there are corporations that benefit from war. War is a business. That is why we send our brave men and women to fight these conflicts. I'm not saying that there have not been just wars in the history of the world. Of course there have been. Of course there have been wars that America has fought that were just. This war was not done to protect our foreign national security interests. I mean, it was done to protect our foreign interests economically, certainly. It was done for business reasons. If you really wanted to, I've said this many times, a lot of people don't know this, who really attacked us on 9/11. Most of those terrorists were recruited from the Wahhabi tribe in Saudi Arabia. So according to the Bush doctrine, we're going to go after anyone who gives aid and comfort to the enemy, or any nation state who harbors terrorists, etc. Who we really should have invaded was Saudi Arabia. Now, obviously, for all kinds of geopolitical and diplomatic reasons and economic reasons, we would never actually do that. I don't have to explain that, but that is where those people came from. Sorry, but that's the truth. That's where Osama bin Laden recruited those people. They were Wahhabis. They were not Afghanis. They were not Iraqis. That's just the way it is. And then the Bush administration contorted themselves into all kinds of positions to try to convince everybody that we need to invade Iraq in order to protect our national interests before there's a mushroom cloud and all this other BS that they threw at us to convince us that this was the right thing to do. And now we're stuck. We're stuck. The sort of neo-isolationism that Ron Paul seems to advocate for, or did during his runs for the presidency, that won't fly. That'll never fly with the American people. And I don't think, I mean, I'm not an interventionist, but I'm not an isolationist either. I think it's important to strike an intelligent balance. But we're stuck now. There's no way for Obama not to respond to this stuff. So we end up bombing. We end up bombing the hell out of the IS. We have to, I mean, if they're going to be beheading our journalists, of course we're going to respond. If we don't respond, we look weak. So we have to respond. We're America. We're the world's last remaining superpower. We have to respond. It's what's expected of us. It's what we expect of ourselves. It doesn't matter who's president. It doesn't matter what they advocate in terms of foreign policy. Personally, I kind of like it, by the way. I know people like Paul Ryan will criticize him for it. But I like that Obama is slow and deliberate in deciding how to deal with these things. I think actually thinking before you act is a good thing. I know if you're a partisan ideologue and you happen to be a Republican, you can't. Your ideology will not allow you to give Obama any credit for that. You are required by your own belief system to view anything he does as the wrong move and weak, and we have to blame everything on him, and I get that. I'm an independent. I'm neither a Republican or a Democrat. So I have the freedom, I give myself the freedom to look at things through a non-partisan filter. And my assessment is that having a president that actually thinks and deliberates and consults before acting, instead of doing knee-jerk things that put our brave men and women in danger, in potentially unnecessary danger, which we all always end up doing anyway. But I actually think that's a good thing. So, but ultimately it doesn't matter because we're stuck. Because of what went on during Bush-Cheney, now we're stuck. We are going to be fighting this battle. Look, now Obama is saying, we're going to send more troops to Iraq. He got us out of Iraq, and now we're getting sucked right back in. And it's going to happen over and over again. And it doesn't matter who the president is, Republican, Democrat, whatever. Doesn't matter. We are stuck. We are stuck for our lifetimes. If I live to be 100 years old, God willing, we'll still be fighting these same wars in the Middle East. I guarantee it. We're completely stuck. And people, some people on the right, they criticize Obama for pulling us out of Iraq, or pulling the bulk of our troops out of Iraq anyway, and, we left too soon. That's what I hear. We left too soon. It doesn't matter when we left. We could have stayed another 5 years, 10 years, 50 years, 100 years. The day we packed up and left, what's happening now was going to happen anyway. Because we're stuck. We are never getting out of this. I'm telling you, I'm absolutely convinced of this. As long as any of us live, we're going to be fighting this war. As long as there's a United States of America. And this is just partisan BS. And if we had a Republican president right now, a leading Democrat would be saying the same thing about that Republican president. It's partisan BS. Because it doesn't matter. We might as well get used to it. Generational war is here to stay, my friends. We're going to be fighting this battle forever. I'll read the rest of this to you quickly. Ryan, who chairs the House Budget Committee and was the Republicans' 2012 vice presidential candidate, is better known for focusing on budget issues and domestic policy than on foreign affairs. But he said he reads intelligence reports and has been getting regular briefings about the Islamic State. Ryan noted that the Sotloff tragedy especially hit home because James Foley, the other executed journalist, graduated from Marquette University a few miles away. The IS group has taken over a third of Syria and Iraq. Let me stop here. If you want to criticize Obama on this, as so many are, of course, the conclusion that they draw is that they've been able to do this because of the vacuum left by the Obama administration getting most of our troops out of Iraq. This has created a vacuum, and by not acting. And by the way, I will criticize Obama for this. He never should have drawn a clear red line in terms of what we would allow to unfold in Syria before acting, and then that red line was crossed, and then we didn't act. While I appreciate him being deliberate and careful. Some say he's too careful. I think history teaches us that being careful is a good thing. But in that particular instance, he never should have drawn that red line to begin with and then pretending that that didn't happen. So I do agree with his critics on the point of Syria. That, I think, is a valid criticism. But, see, if we had left well enough alone and not invaded Iraq and not taken out Saddam Hussein, none of this would have happened. That is the true genesis of this vacuum that was created that the IS has now filled. None of this had to happen. You can't just say, oh, it's all Obama's fault. That is so disingenuous and frankly dishonest. We did not have to create this vacuum to begin with. But the arrogance of those people, of the neocons, whom, by the way, listening to Hillary Clinton, I'm becoming more and more convinced that she's one of them. Liberals who think that she's going to be your big hero, take notice. I think she's a neocon herself. She said Obama was too careful about Syria. Now, again, I'm not saying she's necessarily wrong, but I think she tilts toward neoconservative thinking. But it doesn't matter, right? Because no matter who we elect, we are stuck. I don't care if it's Rand Paul, who seems to be definitely a non-interventionist, certainly not the isolationist that his father is. But it's not going to matter. We are stuck. We are never getting out of this. All right. The Islamic State has taken over a third of Syria and Iraq. It has terrorized rivals and citizens alike with widely publicized brutality. As it seeks to expand a proto-state, it is carved out on both sides of the border. In its rise to prominence over the past year, the extremist group has frequently published graphic photos and gruesome videos of everything from bombings and beheadings to mass killings. In Tuesday's video, the authenticity of which the AP could not immediately verify, a fighter says Sotloff was beheaded as retribution for Obama's continued airstrikes against the group in Iraq. And see, then this cycle continues. This is part of a larger cycle, which Ron Paul himself has pointed out. It's part of how generational war works. And that cycle feeds on itself. That's a bitter pill for some people to swallow, because people like to pretend that America's actions never have consequences. If you even begin to acknowledge that sometimes our actions have negative consequences and sometimes we make mistakes, then they tell you, oh, you're part of the Blame America crowd. Blame America first. You're part of that crowd. You're part of the apologist crowd. No, it's an acknowledgement that sometimes we screw up, like, for example, invading Iraq. Very few people except neoconservatives still think that that was a great idea. Oh, but you say that too loudly, and then, oh, you just want to blame America for everything. Everything's our fault. I hate that. That really gets under my skin. I don't know if you could tell. My headache's starting to go away. Ryan says the U.S. needs to make a decision to finish off the Islamic State. Good luck. Warning that if we don't do it here and now, it will come to get us. What do you want to do, drop a nuke on them? I'm serious. I don't know what can you do to stop this now? What do you do? He said he wasn't trying to be a scaremonger, but he worried that Obama doesn't recognize the severity of the threat. I think he does. Ryan also attacked Obama for comments the president made at a news conference last week. Obama, apparently trying to suggest that he'd take a measured approach to deciding on a U.S. military response rather than make a quick decision, said, "We don't have a strategy yet for targeting the militant group." Ryan said, quote, "If he was going to announce that he doesn't have a strategy, don't telegraph it to the rest of the world," unquote. I call BS on that. He's saying he's just being honest. We don't have a strategy yet, but we're obviously developing one. Now he's talking about sending more troops to Iraq. Obviously, this is in play. That's just a partisan nitpicking. Oh, he's announcing he doesn't have a strategy. Yeah, they're trying to decide what to do here, but there are no good options. Let's move on, because this topic is discouraging. Eric Cantor. We'll talk some domestic politics here. This was posted by the AP yesterday afternoon. Tea Party patriots gloat as Eric Cantor cashes in on Wall Street. Of course. The Tea Party's reaction to news that ousted House Majority Leader Eric Cantor, Republican of Virginia, is headed to Wall Street can be summed up in 3 words. Told you so. Kevin Broughton, a spokesman for the Tea Party Patriot Citizens Fund. I spend a lot of time running these people down, the Tea Partiers. I'm about to agree with something. Mark this down. It's a big moment here. Actually, I do agree with them on some things. When they talk about how corrupt our government is, for example, they're right. I mean, it's hard to disagree with that. I get really upset when they try to not raise the debt limit and destroy our economy in the process, but that's another topic. So Kevin Broughton, a spokesman for the Tea Party Patriot Citizens Fund, said in a statement, quote, "After Dave Bratt's upset victory in June, many analysts accused Eric Cantor of paying more attention to Wall Street than to the peoples of Virginia's 7th District. He certainly didn't waste any time validating that theory," unquote. Can't argue with that. Cantor, who was defeated by Tea Party-backed Dave Bratt in a Republican primary election, is joining investment bank Moelis & Company as vice chairman and managing director. He stands to earn $3.4 million in cash and stocks as a signing bonus, with $1.2 million guaranteed in just the first year. That's worth a lot more stakes than the $174,000 a year salary Cantor earned as a member of Congress. That's why you should never feel sorry for these people, even if it's someone you like when they lose an election. They're set. Trust me. Once you've been a member of Congress, you're part of the system. The system will take care of you. You take care of the system takes care of you. He's rich. Lawmakers regularly trade in on years of experience and influence. This is why we'll never have term limits. Years of experience and influence for cushy law and lobbying firms in Washington. Cantor became just the latest member of Congress to do so. But if anyone has reason to gloat, it's the man who pulled off the stunning upset in June. Bratt, an economics, maybe my headache isn't completely gone. Bratt, an economics professor with unlikely ties to the Tea Party, regularly hammered Cantor for his close ties to lobbyists and the financial industry. Quote, Eric Cantor and the Republican leadership do not know what a free market is at all. And the clearest evidence of that is the financial crisis. When I say free markets, I mean no favoritism to K Street lobbyists, unquote, he told radio host Flint Engelman earlier this year. Bratt was a fierce critic of investment bank Goldman Sachs for its role in the 2007 subprime mortgage debacle, deriding the crony capitalists for going onto Obama's Rolodex, the Republican leadership, and Eric's Rolodex, unquote. Well, I agree with Dave Bratt on that, and I like that he kind of, strange, surprising, in nonpartisan fashion, he kind of hit everybody there. He hits Obama and the Republican leadership and Eric Cantor all at once. They're all in on it, my friends. That's an interesting quote from him, because it's true. They're all in on it. This is what people mean, by the way. I used to hear people say, the Republican Party and the Democratic Party in Washington, they're exactly the same. And I used to hear people say that, and I used to think, that's kind of a lazy way of thinking. That's not really true. I mean, they're on opposite sides ideologically on virtually any major issue you could name. But then eventually I came to understand that what people really mean when they say that, they're not talking about ideology. They're talking about how the two parties operate and how they are part of the system, this self-sustaining system of corruption, and how they use that system for themselves. These people don't give a crap about you, Republican or Democrat. And it's one of the several reasons why I'm an independent. Here's another reason. Because I recognize and acknowledge the fact, and I'm not, look, there's a lot of good people in local politics, okay? I personally know a lot of people, city, statewide, here in New Hampshire, where we do this show, who I think are genuinely good people. But in Washington, D.C., that is a corrupt system. That is a closed system that protects itself. The people there take care of the system, and the system takes care of them. And in that regard, Republicans and Democrats are exactly the same. So if you're voting in these federal elections and you're a Republican or a Democrat, and you vote because you think that's your party, that's your senator, that's your congressman, they're looking out for you, and that's why they have your vote and support, you're wrong. You're wrong. They're looking out for themselves. Maybe they were looking out for you when they first entered Washington. But that's not how the system is designed. I'm not saying that all these people are bad and corrupt when they first get there. But they're operating within a corrupt system. I'm not making excuses for them either, but they are operating within a corrupt system. And they don't work for you. The way the system is designed is at cross purposes with whatever your values and concerns and issues as a voter are. I always say, follow the money. Know who a campaign's donors are. Because if you know what set of lobbyists and corporations, banks and, Wall Street, and know who these people are who are giving money for their in the form of campaign contributions to these candidates, and then you know who they really represent. Then you know who they really work for. It's like Jesse Ventura says. They should all have to wear NASCAR outfits with the patches all over them so that you know who their sponsors are. Sponsors, that's what donors really are. They're sponsors. And then you know who these people really answer to, and then you know whose interests they're really looking out for. Not that it helps you necessarily, because they're still not looking out for you. Unless look, if you're writing out a check for $20, $50 and sending that to your candidate, great, you did your part. But that's not enough to really get you anything. They're not there for you. What other career? And then we'll finish this article in a second. But what other career, aside from being a politan in Washington, what other career can you basically lose your gig And you don't just get a golden parachute. You get to just go on to a better gig where you're making millions of dollars. It's like, what other job? I mean, essentially, when the voters vote you out, they're firing you from your job as their leader, even though you don't really lead them if you're in Washington, because you're working for your donors, your sponsors. But what other gig can you be fired from? And then you just say, okay, well, that sucks. Now I'm going to go here and make 10 times what my salary was, or hell, 50 times more than what my salary was as a United States congressman. What other career is like that where you can do that? Let's see. After he further animated his supporters by highlighting the ways in which money flowed into Cantor's hands, Bratt said at a campaign stop, quote, "Go tell 50 friends about this. It's called the Stock Act, S-T-O-C-K. It's an acronym. The 2012 Stop Trading on Congressional Knowledge Act required regular public disclosure of all stock trades made by congressional lawmakers and their families. But Cantor's office eventually watered down its provisions. Of course, the system protects itself. They're out for themselves. Do you remember this? The Stock Act, it got some play in mainstream media, not a lot. But it's basically, the idea behind it was to say, hey, insider trading is illegal, so why should we let our government do it? Why should we let members of Congress do their own version of insider trading and profit from it? It's illegal if a Wall Street banker does it, and yet we let our government do it? So that's why the Stock Act was passed. So then you say, okay, well, the system did work in that case, right? Well, no, because then they just made sure it was watered down, took the teeth out of it. So that way, you get the feel-good PR of saying, oh, look, we recognize that there's corruption and we're doing something about it. We're going to pass this law to stamp out this corruption. Then, once everyone's done feeling good about it, they turn around and make it meaningless. So everybody wins, right? They get to look like heroes for recognizing the corruption at the federal level of our government. So the voters get to feel good. Everybody gets to feel good. What a great thing. And then they make sure the whole thing was meaningless. But while the Tea Party was quick to tout its work on Tuesday, the soon-to-be congressman was less so. A request for comment on Cantor's new occupation was not immediately returned by Bratt's staff. All right. We'll move on to the next thing. This is related. Listen to this. Oh, you love this. Russian bank hires former Senators Trent Lott, John Breaux to lobby against United States sanctions, according to the Center for Public Integrity. This was posted by Alexander Cohen yesterday. Yeah, you know how we're responding to the crisis in Ukraine, Putin's incursion into Ukraine, with economic sanctions against the Russians, which apparently has been doing some damage. So it doesn't seem to be stopping Putin, but so Russian banks are hiring former senators, former United States senators, to help lobby against these very sanctions. Does this not make your head want to explode? Because if it doesn't, then you're asleep. Let me read this to you. Gazprom Bank, or GPB, a Russian bank targeted with sanctions by President Obama over the Ukraine crisis, has hired 2 former U.S. senators to lobby against those sanctions, according to a new disclosure filed with the Senate. By the way, before we go any further, is anyone thinking treason? Has that word popped in anyone's head? Just wondering. GPB is controlled by Russia's state-owned energy company Gazprom, the country's largest gas producer. It supplies about a third of Europe's natural gas. In a filing submitted Friday and effective that day, former Senate Majority Leader Trent Lott, Republican of Mississippi, and former Senator John Breaux, Democrat of Louisiana, are listed as the main lobbyists under the GPB account for the firm Squire Patton Boggs, lobbying on banking laws and regulations, including applicable sanctions. GPB is a subsidiary of Gazprom Bank, Russia's third largest bank. On July 16th, the U.S. Treasury Department added it to a list of Russian firms barred from debt financing with U.S. institutions. Lott and Breaux left public service almost a decade ago and are among more than 300 members of Congress who've become lobbyists. 300. And begun petitioning former colleagues on behalf of clients, according to the Center for Responsive Politics. In 2008, they started a lobbying firm with their sons, Breaux-Lott Leadership Group, which was acquired by D.C. lobbying powerhouse Patton Boggs in 2010. Patton Boggs merged with Squire Sanders to form Squire Patton Boggs in June. Did you get all that? Gazprom has been in the news a lot. In July, the Permanent Court of Arbitration, an intergovernmental organization located in The Hague, Netherlands, ruled that the Russian government should reimburse $50 billion to certain shareholders of former Russian oil company Yukos. The tribunal said the government, in a series of actions starting in 2003, quote, accompanied by serious due process violations, unquote, had dismantled and seized the assets of Yukos and transferred them to Gazprom and state-run oil company Rosneft. Last month, Russian gas firm OAO Novatek retained Washington, D.C. public relations firm Corvus to lobby the administration and Congress after one of its largest shareholders, an associate of Russian President Vladimir Putin, was similarly targeted for sanctions by the United States. My headache is back. Yeah. Probably didn't need to read that whole thing. There were a lot of details in there that were confusing to probably all of us, but so the upshot is former United States senators lobbying against the very sanctions that our government has imposed to try to put some pressure on Putin to knock it off, essentially, as far as Ukraine. We have a few minutes left. You got to admit, I've been cruising through these things pretty quick, like I said I would. Let's hit this quickly, and we'll get into immigration reform or the lack thereof tomorrow night on the radio edition, because that's going to take a few minutes. This will be quick. Obamacare won't be repealed until at least 2017, Koch brothers-backed group privately admits. This is from HuffPost from yesterday. It's no secret the Republicans are finding Obamacare less useful as a political cudgel in the midterm elections than they'd hoped. The healthcare law is mentioned less and less frequently in attack ads. Fewer Republican candidates are discussing it on the stump. And a consensus has taken hold that the GOP's biggest mistake this cycle was shutting down the government in an effort to repeal it. But does that mean that the push for repeal is now a thing of the past? Officially, no. Ask virtually any Republican elected official in Washington, and they will say that ridding the country of Obamacare remains the ultimate objective. Senate Minority Leader Mitch McConnell, Republican of Kentucky, who has been shifty, to say the least, about what he'd like to see happen in his own state, an Obamacare success story, still frequently calls for repeal root and branch. There's more to this article. I'll finish it tomorrow night on the radio edition, but I've been saying for probably over a year now, they need to, and this is why it's being talked about less and less on the right, They need to get away from the whole repeal and replace mantra. They need to shelve that completely and switch to reform. They need to talk about reforming Obamacare. Reform Obamacare needs to be the new mantra. I'm telling you, in 2016, whoever the Republican nominee is, how he is going to say to, I don't know, what are we up to, 9 million people who've signed up for Obamacare? I think that's the last number I heard, so that's what we'll go with. Maybe more than that, but that'll be our base number. How is the Republican nominee going to say to those 9 million people, by the way, elect me, put me in charge, and I will finally get this done. We will repeal and replace Obamacare. How will the Republican nominee say that to those 9 million people and still win? The horse is already out of the barn. You need to focus pragmatically if you want to win elections at this point. No one believes you anymore. You just sound disingenuous when you say repeal and replace, especially the replace part. You need to shift, Republicans. You must shift from repeal and replace to reform. Talk about reforming the elements of Obamacare that are not friendly to the free market, which I would support doing, by the way. I wasn't that thrilled with Obamacare either. I think some form of healthcare reform needed to be done. But adding additional bureaucracy to an already overly bureaucratized system is not how I would have done it, not how a lot of people would have preferred it be done. So, I wasn't a fan of it either, the way that it was written. But this repeal and replace needs to go away and shift to reform. You guys on the right, you lack any credibility in terms of this mantra of repeal and replace. Time to give it up. It doesn't mean you stop fighting on reforming it, making it better, but you absolutely need to give up on fighting this battle of repealing it. That's going to do it. We're out of time for the television edition of Unleashed. Don't forget, I will be back tomorrow night with the radio edition of Matt Connarton Unleashed. We'll continue. I have some things to say about immigration reform that really, really need to be said. So we'll tackle that tomorrow night on the radio edition of Unleashed, 9 p.m. Eastern Time at dkrn.fm. Don't forget, you can easily get it on your mobile device, dkrn.fm/mobile. If you're watching live on Wednesday, I'll be back at 4 o'clock as Norm's guest on Norm and Friends, and I'll be back at 6 o'clock with Gary for Rock, Paper, Hand Grenades, and by probably about 11 p.m. tonight at the very latest, this week's edition of Unleashed, which you are watching right now, will be available on demand at ipmnation.com/MCUTV. That's it for now. Talk at y'all a little bit later. Thanks, everybody.